driving along the Appalachian Mountains, we often come across these massive old homesteads that have long sat empty. Do you ever wonder about the stories they could tell? Do you ever wonder about the families that lived there and whatever happened to them? Well, we here at Germain Media feel the same way you do. But sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes we can find a family member who can tell us some of the history. In today's episode, that's exactly what happened. We got lucky. A few months ago, we posted a photo on Facebook of an unusual home located on a lonely back road in Wilkes County, North Carolina. We were soon contacted by someone who said they had a family member who had spent a lot of time in this particular house growing up as a child, and that they were willing to tell us some of the stories.
We called him Papa, and or Poppy, some of the grandchildren called him. And he built this house in the early 1920s. I don't know if he had help but he built it mainly by himself. I suppose his daddy helped him. I can remember when the upstairs was finished. I was just a little child, and we'd sneak upstairs and walk on the rafters because it wasn't floored up there. It was the place where they throwed everything that they didn't use anymore, didn't want anymore, or whatever. What I remember about Papa was he was humble, easygoing. I think he was probably about 65 when I was born. He was born in 1886. He was just a kind, gentle man. He never got on to us a lot. We weren't mean children, I don't guess. Or we just got by with a lot of stuff, that's the way it was. Granny had a hard life, but it made it a lot easier after she got here. Papa and Granny didn't have a lot, but they raised what they needed, and he'd sell corn or whatever they grew, and they had milk cows and sold milk and butter. And I've heard Papa tell about cutting a load of tanning bark, some kind of bark off of a tree that they would use at the tannery in North Wilkesboro. And he'd haul it down there, spend the night under the wagon, and come back the next day with whatever provisions they needed. In the summertime, there was always the garden. I had my own calf when I was little, and she was a pet. But the gardening, it was always picking beans and pulling corn, and I can remember when I was just little riding the white horse. Papa would lead the horse and the sled, and we'd pull corn and throw in the sled over yonder in the field. In the summertime, there was green beans all over the place. Mom and Daddy would come and pick the beans, half-bushel tubs, carry them out to the fence and dump them over in a wash tub. We strung beans, and Granny and Papa, they had a stove in the spring house, and a little block building was built when I was little, and she had a stove in there, a wood cook stove in there, and that's where she did the canning. A number 3 wash tub would hold 21 quarts, and Papa would string till he got enough for a canning. Granny would be hunting cans and washing and doing all that, and then we'd start washing beans and put on a canning, and you boiled them 3.5 hours after they started boiling. And Papa manned the fire. Corn, beans, Granny had a strawberry patch, a huckleberry bush. She'd can beets and pickles and all kinds of things, We spent a lot of time here, and of course we didn't want to go home. And that time Mom and Daddy come to get me, and I'd been here about a week, I think. So I told Daddy, he said, "Well, get your stuff, load up." "I ain't going home, Daddy." "Well, that was a mistake." And he told me to get in the car. And we got out to the porch, and I politely went out there and sat down in the yard. Well, his belt came off, and I got a lick across the backside. And a lot of people these days don't want to hear about things like that. But I'd go about a dozen steps, and I'd sit down some more. Well, that continued all the way out to the footlog and across and into the car. The next time my daddy told me to get in the car, I didn't argue. Well, they didn't really decorate for Christmas. And I don't know when my mama was little if they had a Christmas tree or not. I've never heard her say. But one time there was a Christmas tree. And we spent Christmas Eve here. And the next morning I got up and there was the last doll I ever got laying across a rocking chair in the front room. I've still got the doll with the original dress and shoes. The front room in this house is the first room you get to on the right when you come in the door. And there was an old living room suite in there and the pump organ. Papa could play the organ a little bit and enjoyed playing that thing. On the other side of the hall was Uncle Vaughn's room. That was Papa's son by his first marriage. And he was a good uncle. When Uncle Vaughn died, he wasn't an old man. He was probably 50, 40 or 50, I can't remember. That happened along about 1961 or 2, and he was going down the road on his doodlebug. He had an old chopped up car that he made a doodlebug out of. That's what they called them back then. And he ran off the road, and the thing wound up on his head. And they got it off of him, and he died. He just didn't make it. And when they used to call it setting up with the dead, they brought him back here to the house, and he was in the front room all night long. There was people here, and I remember the kitchen was covered in food. Wasn't anywhere to put anything else. And I guess I was here all night long, I don't remember. But they had him here all night long and took him from here straight to the church and buried him. The next room down is where we slept when we was growing up. The kids slept in here when we were here. So there was a big bed here and a twin bed in this corner and then another twin bed behind the door. Now there wasn't a bathroom in the house till late 60s, and that little corner of the hall was made into a potty room, I guess you'd call it. This was the fire room, Granny called it. There was a table in the corner and a bed here and a big pie safe here. And Papa's little short sawed-off .22 rifle laid in those little handmade racks, and the shotgun hung over there in those.
So they spent a lot of time in these two rooms. And so.
In the wintertime,
yeah.
This is where they stayed. So, and then the kitchen. The Hoosier cabinet, I'm not sure, but that looks like the same cabinet, was behind the stove. And the stove was actually turned this way. And the wood box was at the end of it over here. And the sink was where it was. The refrigerator was here. And it was called a Calvinator brand. That was the original refrigerator brand, and that's why a lot of older folks calls a refrigerator a Calvinator.
Right.
My mama still calls it a Calvinator. The water in the sink, it run all the time. Never was cut off. It came from up on the side of the mountain in a spring. These were easier to climb when I was younger.
That happens.
Yeah. My left knee don't work as good as it used to.
Wow, it's warmer up here.
Yeah. There was a bed in that corner over there. And there was always a little table with quilts stacked on it in the hall in here, nearly to the ceiling. Granny made quilts. Papa took his nap on this bed.
Every afternoon?
Every afternoon, he'd come up here and take you a little nap
A little siesta.
when he was older. But this part of the house was not, this up here was not floored till I was grown.
And this is when you all played up here on the rafters.
Yeah, when we were little. Now these steps, I got to the third step, my feet flew out from under me, whew, on a nail, and I wound up at the bottom. Big time trip.
Been a lot more fun if you just ridden the handrail.
Well, I didn't think about it. I didn't have time to think about that.
It's kind of a low bridge for me.
Yep, watch your head.
That's right.
Yeah, watch your head. The main difference is the living back then and today. Things were much different back then. We didn't have much. Papa and Granny didn't have much. You appreciated what you did have. Life was simpler. I think modern times people don't know how to appreciate what it's like to have a quiet place where the hubble and the bubble and all of life's not running you by and dragging you with it. So, a lot to be said for sitting on the porch sipping your coffee. Sharing memories with people from our past is important. I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And the things I remember, my grandchildren will never know about if I don't tell them. And it's important to know where you came from. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. So that's important. I'm doing my best to write down things that I remember. And I may never get it all wrote down, but what I get wrote down will be there. So maybe my grandchildren will enjoy reading it someday.
I guarantee you they will. You know the question I'm going to ask next.
What's that?
Could you share it with us? A verse?
I suppose I could. As my mind takes me back through the pages of time to a place in the mountain time left far behind, a place of much beauty.